London was heavy with rain that night, the kind that clung to the cobblestones like secrets refusing to be washed away, and yet inside a private suite at the Ritz, the air was heavier still, thick with whispers, bargaining, and the faint metallic taste of betrayal. The meeting, shrouded in absolute secrecy, had not been placed on any royal calendar, not even the palace's own internal logs, but sources close to the corridors of Buckingham insisted it was a gathering of monumental stakes, a collision of pride and profit, of dignity and desperation, for around the polished mahogany table sat representatives of the most fractured family in the world, the British royal family, and on the other side, intermediaries for Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, two exiled figures who had, for years, turned their backs on the gilded cage only to find the outside world colder and far less forgiving than expected. The question that hung over the room like a guillotine was simple yet dangerous: could peace be bought, and if so, at what price? Charles, tired beyond his years, was said to be leaning back in his chair, fingers steepled, eyes flickering toward Camilla, who wore her usual look of calculated boredom, though palace insiders knew she was a master of reading the invisible currents. William sat rigid, a storm brewing in the set of his jaw, his gaze locked on the ornate carpet as though counting the threads might keep his temper in check, while Kate, the ever-composed Princess of Wales, kept her features neutral but her mind racing, knowing full well that the public image of the monarchy was teetering on the edge of a cliff. Across from them, representing the Sussexes, were two individuals described by witnesses as slicker than oil on glass, men in tailored suits who spoke in the kind of careful, rehearsed tones one might hear in boardrooms when billion-dollar mergers are on the line. But this wasn't about corporations, this was about reputations, legacies, and the quiet possibility of silencing, once and for all, the constant barrage of explosive interviews, tell-all memoirs, and whispered threats that Meghan and Harry had so effectively. The terms on the table, according to one source who risked their career to speak, were staggering: tens of millions in charitable donations that would conveniently find their way into causes closely tied to the Sussex brand, a restoration of certain titles for their children to give them the royal sheen they so craved, and, most disturbingly, a series of carefully orchestrated public appearances designed to create the illusion of unity, all in exchange for one thing: the guarantee that the Sussexes would cease their relentless campaign of airing royal laundry. But William, sources say, was having none of it. He saw it not as diplomacy but as extortion, a betrayal of everything the monarchy stood for, and when his voice finally broke the polite tension of the room, it was cold and sharp enough to slice through the rain outside, declaring in no uncertain terms that the crown was not a commodity to be. Charles, however, remained silent for a moment too long, and in that pause lay the truth everyone feared: the king, worn down by endless scandals, the pressure of modernizing an institution built on centuries of rigidity, and the specter of public opinion turning ever more cynical, was considering the deal, not because it was right, but because it might buy the one thing the palace no longer had. Camilla's eyes narrowed ever so slightly, sensing her husband's weakness, while Kate's fingers curled into her lap, her knuckles whitening as she realized that the price of peace would be paid not just in money but in the dignity of the family. Meanwhile, outside the hotel, the press had no idea of the meeting's true purpose, their cameras trained on the revolving door, ready to pounce on any familiar face, but inside, the war for the soul of the monarchy raged on in silk-lined silence, each offer and counter-offer weaving a web so tangled that no one would emerge. For if the deal was made, it would signal to the world that the royal family could be manipulated by the very people they had once banished, and if it was refused, it would mean bracing for the inevitable: another bombshell interview, another book dripping with allegations, another round of headlines designed to bleed the palace of. And so the meeting stretched into the early hours, the rain outside growing heavier, as though the city itself were trying to drown out the shame of what was unfolding, until finally, sources say, Charles spoke, his voice low but carrying the weight of the crown, uttering words that would never be released to the public but that those in the room would never forget, words that would decide whether the monarchy remained a fortress or became a. And when the doors at last opened, and the delegates slipped away into the London fog, no one could say for certain what had been agreed, only that something had shifted, subtly but irrevocably, in the balance of power between palace and exile, and that from that night forward, every smile, every handshake, every carefully staged photograph of the royal family would carry the ghost of that rain-soaked bargain, whispering the question the public would never stop asking: had the crown sold its soul, and if so, was the price worth it?